Welcome everyone. I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata, and I'm also the Managing Director of Tower Corporate on the Gold Coast. I'm your host for this webinar. We welcome back Paul Morton and Jenine Garcia from Lannock Strata Finance to discuss the economics of capital works in strata. How do you decide which capital works project is most appropriate? Is the cheapest quote the best quote? What are the available sources of funds, and how do you make the best choice? How does tax affect your decision, and how can levies be structured to be tax effective? Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information in this session, including the discussions arising from submitted questions and the chat conversations, is not legal advice or financial advice and should not be relied upon as advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in this session. We welcome Paul Morton from Lannock Strata Finance. From a symphony orchestra to working in a bank to a prestigious overseas business school to founding Australia's leading strata finance company, Paul Morton has covered a lot of ground. He has degrees in music and economics, as well as postgraduate finance and management degrees, and Paul is a Sloan Fellow of Stanford University. Paul is deeply engaged in the strata industry and is acknowledged as the country's subject matter expert in the economics of strata plans. And we also welcome Jenine Garcia from Lannock Strata Finance as well, with over 10 years of sales and operational experience in the financial sector. Jenine leverages her in-depth knowledge to help Lannock Strata Finance clients achieve the right outcome for their next strata project, whether it's funding defect rectification, litigation, insurance, or strata asset renewal and transformation.
Okay, well, here we all are. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is fantastic. Do you want to say something, or we just move straight in?
I do. I was going to refer to the fact that Paul is the finance nerd here this morning. So
when I grew up, being a nerd was a really bad thing.
Now it's kind of a good thing.
Okay.
And I'm here. I'm at the coalface of Lannock, so I'm out talking to owners corporations every day and seeing the challenges they're facing. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a balanced view.
When Nikki and I started talking about this idea, I had this wonderful topic. It was something like, the value of economics in strata finance and how to achieve the best returns on your capital investment. And she just looked at me and laughed and said, okay, we're going to call it bang for your buck. So I thought, okay, well, that's a much better title than I had. And it got me thinking, I guess because I'm a nerd, where does the bang for your buck come from? And actually, I was surprised to find out it was this guy, Mr. Sherwin, I think his name is, who was the chief of economics at the time, sorry, the advisor to the US government at the time. And that's when he came up with the idea, when they were fighting the Cold War, that nuclear weapons gave more bang for the buck. He was also the CEO of General Motors. And that started me thinking on, well, what does bang for buck actually translate to in a strata environment? And the first thing I thought of, well, we'd all think of is value for money. Okay, that was pretty good. But value for money starts to be confusing, because what does that mean? Is it going to be the best product at a good price? Or when you think of value for money, is it a good product at a really cheap price? Or is it any product will do as long as it's the absolute cheapest price?
So I will note there, Paul, that we are seeing a situation in this whole country nationally at the moment where, as our viewers will be aware, we're looking at the outcome of any product at the cheapest price, with cladding and defects problems across the country. So in different states, the government stepped in to address those issues and assist owners, but it always comes back to the owner. And the owners themselves are seeing the fallout of the cheapest product, no matter the quality. The thing that I see when I'm out there speaking with owners corporations is sometimes even seeing the result, having to deal with the result of these decisions, they're still making that same decision. They're going for the cheapest price, no matter the quality.
Well, it sort of leads us to, I don't know, capital works funding principle number one. We'll give it an important name, which is, given that value is going to mean so many different things in so many different situations, the first thing for an individual owner to do is to work out what value for them is going to mean. Is it functionality, or is it the aesthetics? Do you just want to replace what's there, that's giving you the problem, or do you want to improve it? Do you want to have a solution where there's a low impact on the owners in terms of disruption from the works going on? Are you worried about the working hours or people's safety? Is price the big thing for you, or is it quality, or is it time? Unless you've sorted out individually how you fit on these and a few other things, metrics as well, I'm sure appropriate to your individual situation, then there's going to be tears before bedtime, which then leads to, well, what do you as a, let's take the committee first. When the committee's looking at something, what actually are your decision metrics? And it's important to be thinking about this right from the start, rather than later on, for example, comparing 3 quotes, and somebody likes this one because the builder has a nice smile, and somebody likes this one because it's cheap, and someone likes this one for whatever reasons. Starting with getting this agreement, and I know I'm making it sound easy because it's extremely hard to get agreement, but working out what your objectives are at the beginning is going to save a lot of hassle down the road. There is no one size fits all. And that applies to strata finance, which is a mantra of ours all the time. But it comes as no one size fits here. It's actually for what is right for your people in your property at that time. And it's very hard to say, do it this way, or the government should have a law so that everybody has to do it that way. It actually is dependent on that particular situation. The next one is, and it's often called to, well, it's come as a triangle here. I don't know whether this comes from project management. I don't think it's a finance principle, but the idea that in any project, there's only 3 issues in the end. There's price, and there's quality, and there's time. Those are the 3 variables that you get to play with. And the fundamental law, not even a principle, is you're only going to win on 2 of those. If you want to have the great quality and you want to have the really good price, then it's going to take time. If you want the speedy job and a really good price, then you are going to be compromising on quality. And this is why it's really important to go back to the beginning and work out, what are your objectives as an individual? What do you think is right for your property? What do you think people should agree with? And then working it out as a committee. Ultimately, you need to work that out as a whole group of owners. But thankfully, it's a majority rule there. You don't actually have to convince everybody that pink is the best colour for the foyer.
And Paul, it's actually a problem we see in owners' corporations all the time, or body corporates all the time, that lack of alignment between the committee and different owners. So time does become an issue, and they're not, all of them want to pick something different. So it is a big problem.
Well, it's in the end, it's sort of like a matter of politics. And I remember Stephen Goddard, who was the founding president of the Owner Corporation Network, we're talking about strata is parish pump politics. It's working out at the most fundamental grassroots level what a group of people are going to want to do. So up front. Now, time. There's that carpenter's thing about measure twice, cut once. Investing time at the beginning of the project is going to save you a lot of hassle down the track. Quality is going to cost you. It costs you time in research, time in planning, and a time in actually getting to the right decision. I wish there was a magic wand here. I wish we could just, I mean, there sort of is in finance, because we can come in quite quickly and say, well, these are the attributes of the 3 finance options. But this stuff here in working out the nature of the project you want to do and how and why takes an investment of time. And you need to engage people on a journey. I don't think there's much point coming up to that first meeting and presenting your brilliant plan that you've been thinking of, whatever it is, and expecting people to go, wow, that's fantastic, Janine, let's do that right away. People aren't like that. They need to be taken on the journey. Now, price, and this has been something that at Lannock we've been banging on about for years. Almost everybody focuses on price. Why not? It's obvious. But if you're going to think cheap, there's a very good reason why cheap and nasty are usually in the same sentence. So let's go back to the title of this webinar, which is Bang for Your Buck. If you're wanting to think of this in terms of value for money, then This is where we can put our stuff in. Now, this is where Lannock's experience becomes useful. Because when you're thinking about a project, it's not about cost. If you think cost and if you think expense, then you've automatically locked yourself and everybody you talk into thinking cheap. Because that's what we think when we hear the words expense or cost. You just got to get those words out of your vocabulary. And the word to replacement is investment. So if we're going to have a second principle or something like that, investment is the one. Whether you're fixing some pavers which are broken, or whether you're putting a penthouse on top and digging a big hole for a car park or whatever it is, you're investing in your property. You're investing in your wealth. You're investing in something which creates value for you to live in or value for you to get a financial return from.
So, Paul, it sounds like you're badgering people about investing at this point.
I am. I am badgering it about it. Because if you think expense, you're going to have the cheapest. It's natural. If you think investment, whether you're investing to restore the value back to what it used to be or you want it to be, or you're investing to create extra value, if you think investment, then you automatically are going to think return on investment. ROI, return on investment. That is the decision metric for all your capital works in Strata. So let's pause for a moment. We went from bang for buck to value for money. And the problem is we need to get everybody on the same page as to what value for money actually means. And that led us then to the project triangle of there's quality, time, and cost, and you're only ever going to win on two of those. And from here, talking about the price aspect, we went to investment. So should you do the $50,000 project or the $500,000 project? Or engage this contractor at $100,000 or this one for $1.1 million? I think that was meant to be 110.
Yeah.
It's about investment. Because if you say, oh, 100,000 is cheaper than 110, you're missing the investment point. So here's some examples. Project A. There's 10 lots in this property, and we're talking about investment of $50,000. The value that's going to be created for 10 lots is considered to be $6,000 per lot, either restoring value that's lost because the painting is decrepit or whatever it might be, or creating value because you're going to add balconies that never existed. Okay, that's right. The excess of the value over the investment here is $10,000. So what's the return? You've made $10,000, we could possibly even call it profit, but extra. You've invested $50,000, 20% return. That's good. Looks pretty good to me. Let's take project B. 200,000. The value that's going to be created per lot or restored per lot is 30,000. Value is 300,000 created. The excess of value over the investment is 100,000. So the ROI, 100,000 over 200 is 50%. Who wins? Really obvious. Project B wins. 50% return is one huge amount better than 20% return. Okay, but let's move on a bit. I think you've got an example.
I do have an example. So this is an actual product that happened in Sydney's inner west. The cost of the project was $231,000. There was extensive water ingress, which meant works on the balconies, the stairwell, the roof. The roof obviously was impacting internally within the apartments, and 2 of the lots out of this 5-lot strata plan were uninhabitable. So they were owned by investors and they weren't able to have a tenant in there for quite some time. So $231,000 was the cost of the project. It did restore the value per lot by $60,000. And that was restoring value and also a little bit of capital growth in there because they presented a lot better. So the total value created by that project, that investment, was $300,000, which meant the excess value created was $69,000. So the return on investment was 30% on that one. What do you think?
I think that was a very good idea that they went ahead and did those works.
Absolutely.
If it was negative, you'd be saying, well, why are we doing this? The problem is understanding the role of borrowing in the mix of how you'd fund it. So I want to take us out of this for a while and think, how did you pay for your apartment? Could you afford it? Did you pay the full amount in cash? So for example, you bought your apartment, let's just pick a nice round number, $500,000. Did you pay $500,000 to the purchaser? Well, I'm being a little bit direct and personal here, so I apologize for that, but probably you didn't, because mostly in Australia, if we're going to buy a $500,000 property, we have $100,000 saved, which is the deposit, 20%, and we borrow the rest. So why did you borrow? Well, we borrow because we had to. It's an enabler. We want that apartment. It's a good thing, but we don't have 500,000. We only have 100,000. Now, perhaps not consciously, because not everybody works out a spreadsheet in their head all the time like I might, but perhaps intuitively, you actually understood and you included the cost of borrowing in what you were thinking of. You knew you only had $100,000. You knew you wanted to pay $500,000 because that was the apartment value. You knew you had to repay the loan. You knew you had to pay interest. But intuitively, you had a sense of the value I get here is greater than the cost. Now, why am I badgering people about this?
Well, you're turning it into an advertisement for strata loans.
Well,
For strata
no,
financing.
no, absolutely not, because we have to come back to the principle that there is actually no one best form of finance. It's not that a capital works fund is bad. It's not that a special levy is good or borrowing is bad or anything like that. All the sources of funding, and I'll come back to this return on investment thing soon, all the sources of funding have a cost. Some people, when they're buying that property, think, oh, that $100,000, my deposit that I put in, that's free. And then they think, oh, the debt from the bank costs money. Obviously it does, it's the interest rate. But the cash that you had is not free. It had a cost. You had to sacrifice to get to it. The mortgage has a cost. You have to sacrifice that, you have to pay it. But that $100,000 you can do other things with. You could have a holiday or buy a nice car or give it to the kids or a charity or any sorts of things like that. You chose over all the other options to invest that $100,000 into buying the property. And it's a similar sort of thing here when it comes to the capital works. Now, I'm saying here that that $100,000 wasn't free money. It had a cost to it. You took it off share market or off deposit, or you didn't have that nice thing. That's a cost. So let's go through and take this through a little bit further. And I hope, just bear with me a bit, we're getting to it, because the point to make here is your capital works fund is not free. There's a cost to it. There are other things you could have done with the levies that went into it. And it's taxed, but that's a separate thing at the moment. Your special levy is not free. You have to pull that money from somewhere. And wherever it comes from has a cost. If you're drawing down on your mortgage, there's a cost to that interest rate. If you're forgoing the chance of capital gains on the share market or forgoing the lovely holiday, that's a cost too. And your strata finance is obviously, clearly not free.
So this is a hard concept for people to grasp, Paul. When I'm talking to owners, you can see the bewilderment. Why is there a cost to the money that they've got in the capital works fund? Surely they've already paid that cost. Why is there a cost?
There's a cost because of where it comes from. So yes, in order to make that contribution to the capital fund, I didn't go to the movies or I didn't have that money on deposit. And the easiest way to think about it, because all that happened in the past, is if that money here now was returned to me personally, what would I be doing with it? My unit entitlement might be 10% and there's $100,000 there or $1 million, 10% of that amount of money. If I had it personally, what's the best way I could use those funds? Okay. That is the cost of having the capital works funds. And maybe it's emotional. I just feel good to have that money in my bank account. Or maybe it's, yes, I would do this thing. I would invest it in a term deposit and get 4-point-something% or whatever the rate is at the moment. That's part of the cost of what it is. The strata finance is not very obviously. It's the cost of the interest rate which is paid.
Yeah.
Interesting to think about tax. It's a really, to me, quite fascinating. And I'd argue that everybody had tax as a part of their decision make when they buy property, when they bought property in Australia, or when they buy property. For many investors, it's all about tax. You know, I'm going to do this thing, negatively gearing it. I'm thinking of the tax returns, my cost of it, and how it works out. There's a tax deduction to be gained here. That's really obvious. It's less obvious for people who are going to live in the residence. But the issue with tax there is the great advantage of not having to pay capital gains tax when you sell. That's why the concept in tax of a primary place of residence is so important. Whenever you sell, for whatever reason, at what time, there is no capital gains tax. And that's a pretty significant thing on the improvement in cost. So what's the cost of your levies? The interesting thing for me is that tax was a critical decision of when people buy their apartment, but they're never thinking about the after-tax costs of the levy decisions that they make. And they're very, very different, whether you're an investor or you live in your residence, or whether it's a commercial property. The tax implications are quite different. And they're very different whether it's a capital works fund that you're contributing to. Because in the end, everything gets paid by levies. Your levy to the capital works fund has a different tax implication than the special levy, and also a completely different one than the levy that'll service a loan.
Well, I feel like people don't think about that because it really is quite complicated. And also, can we focus, Paul, or have a mention as to why what's happening at the moment with works going up considerably is the cost per lot is becoming quite extensive. So people are going to their mortgages to put the special levy onto their mortgage.
Well, yes, that's true. And that's not a bad financial decision. Well, not as an overall thing. I mean, you can't say it is bad to draw on your mortgage to pay a levy. It depends on the situation. It depends on your personal finances. It depends on your personal tax position as to whether that's actually a really good way to fund. We're talking about a special levy here rather than admin levy.
That's right.
How that works out. But it's a good pickup. Your mortgage has two costs. One is the obvious cost, which is the interest rate. You have to think about before and after tax, but we'll leave that for the moment. Obviously, there's a cost to your mortgage of the interest rate, but there is another cost to it. It's a bit more subtle, and that is if you have the ability to draw down on a mortgage, and a lot of people do, there's a redraw facility or something on their mortgage, so that's good. But what you have is access to credit. Okay, great thing. If you use it to fund the special levy, then you no longer have that benefit of the access to credit. Now, it's a bit subtle, but it is actually thinking that is a good thing to have access to credit. It's a lovely thing to have cash, okay, because you can use it when that's why we save for a rainy day. But it's also similarly a lovely thing to have access to credit.
So you're saying limiting that access to credit limits people's ability to perhaps purchase an investment property or a new car or
be prepared for that unexpected thing. Now, neither of these things are good or bad. They are things to weigh up in the scenario. Part of the cost of drawing down on your mortgage is reducing that access to credit. It will depend on the individual person and by how much and what's left as to whether it becomes a wise decision or a poor decision. It gets a little complicated. Let's look at that ROI formula again. Here it is. So return, which is the increase in value, minus the investment, divided by the investment. We get about that multiplied by 100 bit at the moment. That's okay. That will enable you to calculate the ROI. So pretty happy about that. That's a good thing. So it comes down to another issue, which is why invest in your common property?
So I think the obvious things there are, obviously it's the law. Owners are required by legislation to repair and maintain. So that's one of the big things, obviously, and I know that's a massive struggle that strata managers are facing every day, just that lack of understanding that owners are required by legislation to repair and maintain. At the moment, we're seeing insurance impacted. the insurers are becoming very risk adverse, and if owners aren't repairing and maintaining their building, they're seeing massive increases in their premiums, and in some instances, cancellation of their insurance. Legal matters, occupational health and safety. The owners' corporation, of course, are responsible for anything that happens on their property, and if there's a lack of maintenance that's caused an issue, that can be a big problem. Reducing legal liability if someone does have an accident.
Okay. And there's a few more. I mean, they're the clear financial ones, but I think the other one is it actually makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And it gives you a return. So important to me in the calculation of return on investment is not just the financial return, the increase in value, but how you feel about where you're living and what it's like. Is it the sort of place that you want to be? Is it the sort of place it was when you moved in? And if it's gone down, or having moved in, do you want to, as a collective group of people, improve it to be something different? That's actually important. But to me, the critical thing is you're always going to make the right decision, or a far better decision, when you consider all these things as investing, not as costs or expense that you have to bear. So included in that investment is the notion of the cost of financing. Now, we were talking about this a little bit before, but we can move on to the next one, I think, possibly. The cost of financing works out as part of the investment cost. It's not just these works are going to cost, let's say, $100,000. It's the funding for them has to come from somewhere. Is it coming from our capital works fund, and what's the cost to us of that? Is it coming from special levy, and is it coming from borrowing? Now, strata finance works the same way as the mortgage example I gave. It's an enabler in order to have things done. And fine, it has a cost to it, really clear. And that cost, depending on your situation, may be more or less than the costs of the other things. But we're not comparing zero with the interest rate of strata finance. We're comparing the cost of other things with the finance. And also, we're needing to look at it from an after-tax point of view. So we did refer to the project triangle, and it has come up here again. There's only one solution to this, and that is project management. Because projects do not just happen, they have to be managed. So who's the right person to do this? Well, again, there's no one size fits all. It depends. It could be your strata manager. It could be the committee or a committee member, or it could be an owner with some special expertise or interest. And then the obvious one is a third-party professional manager. So we've got experience in funding hundreds of thousands of projects, actually, just like your strata manager, who is managing many, many properties and has experience, and the company they come from has many, many experiences. Lack of a good project management has many more problems in our experience. So to the extent that our larger loans, we're actually now, we're not necessarily requiring an external project manager, but making sure that we are comfortable with the quality of the project management, however it's going to be achieved.
So I will stop you there, because I do listen to owners' corporations, and that is an area where they feel they can save money. Why not manage it yourself?
Okay, well, it depends on your situation, and depending on the makeup of your committee and your owners, maybe it's a really good thing, but it has to be considered and evaluated. But there's a few reasons that I like about an external project manager. And one of them to me is just obvious. What if something goes wrong? If you're managing it as a committee or as a person on the committee and something goes wrong, then there's going to be a lot of fingers pointed exactly at you. You are to blame. Well, it might not be your fault. It could be something here, but you're the person they're going to direct their anger to.
Does happen, yeah.
An external party, you've got someone else to blame. And I think that's incredibly valuable. You need to have time. You need to have resources to do it. There is a legal liability here, so you need to think through that and be okay about it, and really question yourselves. Do you really have the skills required for this particular project? Depending on the makeup of your committee or individuals, you may well have them, but don't just naively think it's going to be okay. I think, though, for me, the biggest one is you have to decide which side of the fence you're going to be on. Are you going to be part of every owner saying, we want improvement and this is how we want to have to do it? You, Miss So-and-so or Mr. X, are the person we're entrusting you with it. We are paying you money, get it right. Or do you want to be in the position where the other owners are expecting that of you? And when I think about that, I think, oh, I think I'd rather go the professional.
You know, Paul, I have seen instances where later committees actually try to litigate against previous committees for decisions made. So it can be very tricky, self-managing.
I don't know that any of those have actually got up, but just the stress of it.
Just the stress
in the
of
meantime.
it, absolutely.
Okay, so how are most strata decisions made? We got a slide on this? I think so, yes.
Yes.
Choosing the right contractor. Here's one at 100, here's one at 96, and here's one at 110. Guess who's going to get this job? I think in the past it's pretty obvious B wins. But how competent are they? Which is related to their qualifications often. How long will they take to do the job? How clean will they be? How respectful are they going to be of owners? How many callbacks are you going to have? And that's really an important one. The bigger the project, the more likely that there will be callbacks. It's just the way things are. It's not necessarily going to be, we've just done this thing and it's perfect. Little things will happen. How quickly will they come back? How responsibly will they do it? Are they going to want to charge you for those extra bits and pieces that might be happening? But there's a few other issues as well. Might they go broke and so abandon the project? Now, depending on what your project is, changing contractors is a rather difficult experience. Or might they go break later on and not be around to deal with any issues which might arise 6 months later or whatever it might be?
That is a pressing question for owners because we have seen so many construction companies folding, going broke. There was one this week.
Yep.
Pressing question.
And scary. I think the other one, and this is one that can really get up my nose when I see it's happened. Are they paying some kind of kickback to some kind of person involved? Now, kickback's a really pejorative word. I think that's a bad thing. Okay, I shouldn't use the word kickback. The payment may be legal, but at the very least, I'd want it to be transparent and to be really clear. Or is there some kind of association between, I don't know, the contractor who's doing the work and the chairman of your property who just happens to think that this contractor is the best thing? Those should be transparent. And the way to get transparency is to ask the questions. It may be legal. It's quite possibly legal. It's even quite possibly, or it's possibly beneficial. That relationship could be a really good thing. But you need to know about any relationships that there might be. So how do you make these choices? Ask them the questions. You can get a professional to help you choose. For example, there's a whole coterie of specialists to help you make decisions about the right works you need to get on your modification of your lift. Lift consultants. It's a whole specialist little sector for itself. Ask for references and check them out. Inspect their other projects. Are they members of all the organizations that you expect that they ought to be? And is there any industry or media on them? So you'll have your own questions of things. What this comes down to is investing the time and the effort at the beginning of the project, not near the end. Now, Strata's been affected by quite a few things over the last few years as legislation changing, COVID and the delays that it caused, defects, the supply chain issues still, inflation, lack of contractors working, impact of legislation which can plug up the works or mean you have to do more work, etc. In retrospect, it's easy to say that these are the problems of 2018. And if you'd proceeded then, you could have saved yourself a lot of money. But
Everything's easy in retrospect.
it is. We're in the position we are now, facing the issues we are now. And maybe we could have predicted a few things and sorted them out. But the simple thing is, and every strata manager will say this, every strata financier will say this, any delay is going to cost you money.
Always, always.
I'm not talking about the delay of let's make sure we've got it right, because that might take 3 months, and it's a bit silly to go off in 1 month if it takes 3. Or for a huge project, maybe that takes 3 years, and it's a bit silly to go off half-cocked in 1 year. But if there is work to be done on a strata property, experience of every strata manager is do it now.
Absolutely, Paul, and I see it all the time. We've seen it for a long time here at Lannock. The deals that are the hardest are the ones, or the most difficult to look at, are the ones that came to us 3 years ago, went to a general meeting, decided not to proceed, and they come back to us in 2 or 3 years' time, and the project used to double. But now, with all of the issues that Paul noted, supply chain issues, inflation, contractor shortage, we're seeing extensive increases in cost of works.
Have we finished chatting? Are we ready for questions?
I think we are ready for questions.
Nikki,
yes.
give us some questions, please.
So thank you very much for that. I think it was a great conversation. Very practical, high level, as well as being practical on what's happening out there, which sounds great. Okay, so we did have some questions. So the first one I might mention is one from New South Wales. I'm a one-person committee for a small unit block in Sydney. We have 2 major repairs pending. Both have been voted down at EGMs more than once. How can I persuade my fellow owners to agree to these repairs? Which payment options would you recommend as the most appropriate and least painful? And then in addition to that, we had a couple of other questions that were all around that same concept. So things like if works have been said to be essential by an engineer, but the OC does not achieve a satisfactory yes vote for the funding, how do those in favour make it happen before the council steps in and does? And there was also something mentioned in chat about a fire order as well. Okay, well, each of those is probably a 1-hour seminar. That's great. I've got the afternoon free. Okay, some really quick comments here. In a one-person committee in a small block, perhaps you don't have a strata manager. I don't know whether you should have a strata manager or not, but that would be one thing that I'd be investigating as to whether you should have a strata manager, or maybe someone who is just on call to help you with more expertise than you have at the moment. So you're not actually engaging them as a strata manager, but they are maybe a strata lawyer or a strata professional in some way, or a consultant in some way, who can say, look, seen this problem many times before, do it this way. If they've been voted down, well, it's in this question, I think it was repairs. The New South Wales legislation is unambiguously strong. An owner corporation must repair and maintain the common property. And that's why strata managers bang on about repair and maintain the common property all the time. The obligation is so strong, you must repair and maintain common property even if you didn't realise there was a problem, which sort of sounds counterintuitive, but there's no excuse like, oh, we're thinking about it, or we don't have the budget, or we got 3 quotes, or we're going to do it next year. It's positive, unambiguous, and immediate. So how to convince them? We don't have enough time here to talk through all convincing strategies, but I think as a start in your situation, because it seems like you're a bit on your lonesome, talk to a few professionals and get some advice. Starting off trying to convince them is a really good idea. But in the end, for all these things, it's an application to the Consumer Affairs Tribunal. There's one in each state. They more or less do the same thing in each state. And anyone can do, well, I shouldn't say anyone can do that at any time, but it is relatively easy for an owner to go to NCAT seeking for the orders to say, you haven't decided to do this, so effectively the government is saying, do it.
And I will say, Paul, that is good advice, the last one, because I have been, sometimes you have no alternative but to go to the tribunal. I've been in meetings where there's been a lawyer, engineer, ourselves, the strata manager, trying to tell them what to do, and the insurer. all of them telling them they needed to proceed and still coming up against, obstructions, yes. So sometimes there is no choice. The legislation is great, absolutely rely on that if you can go armed with facts and also advice from experts, but sometimes there's no choice.
Yep.
Okay.
Nikki, you're better able to answer that question than we are.
Well, one of the things I think was great that you'd mentioned in there was the impact of insurance for people not carrying out defects and not repairing defects, and how that's coming back. And we're certainly seeing much more of that come in by questions from all around Australia. So, yeah, I think it was great that you mentioned that. The other thing too, for New South Wales, I believe that the Building Commission New South Wales office, you can actually contact the office, and David Chandler will send out a investigator to have a look at the defects. I think that's something that his new office is offering as well. So check that out. We might be able to include a link for that one too. Okay, so Queensland, what happens when borrowing creates a negative balance sheet? All strata funds are used for capital works, leaving a minimal cash balance but a large loan. How does the lender view negative balance sheets, and is there any requirement for extra levies to rectify? Or can the balance sheet remain negative as long as sufficient levies are collected to meet loan repayments and ongoing expenses?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. It appeals to the accounting nerd part of my brain.
Let you take it.
The first one to acknowledge is that strata accounting is a very peculiar beast. It's not at all like company accounting or anything like that. So what you expect to see in a normal company balance sheet, you will not see in a strata balance sheet. So that's the first thing. The next thing is that a balance sheet typically is trying to give an approximation of the value of something. And that's not what we see in any strata balance sheet. It just doesn't do that, because the value of your unit is what someone's prepared to pay in a reasonable market. Willing buyer, willing seller, that sort of stuff. And the value of your property is, simply put, the aggregate of all the individual unit values. And the balance sheet's going to look nothing like that. So therefore, I'd argue balance sheet is a nice place to find some bits and pieces of facts, but that's about all. And the fact that it may be positive or negative means nothing whatsoever. The next aspect, though, is if we're speaking specifically about another way of looking at a balance sheet, or balance sheet concept, is to say, well, we got ourselves a capital works fund plan, and it says that over the next 10 years or whatever's left in it, we expect to have to spend $1 million or 100,000, whatever the number is. Okay. That's not to say, well, over 10 years, there's $100,000. We need 100,000 in the kitty now. It's over 10 years, we're expecting this. Things might change. That air conditioner, which was expected to be replaced in 2030, might not need to replace to 2034, or maybe it'll be at 2026. All these changes happen. And this expectation it's going to cost 50,000 might turn out to be 40, or it might turn out to be 80. But it's giving you a bit of a picture of what to look at. The next one is not to have cash available. You didn't have the cash available right now in order to buy your property, but you thought about how you were going to fund it. Now, the thinking and the planning is the critical thing in my view. And it's quite okay to say, we are going to fund this with 100% capital works fund. Now, and actually in Queensland, there's legislation which is more onerous in requiring that. But as a principle, nationwide principle, it's quite okay to say, we're going to fund it with this, or we're going to fund it with a special levy, or we're going to fund it with borrowing, or whatever mix of those three things you think is fine. But the issue is, it's in the planning. It's not necessarily having the cash sitting in your piggy bank right now. And in thinking about what mix, there's two critical things to think of, which people don't. I mean, if you talk to any kind of politician, it's as if a sinking fund is the only thing in the world, or a capital works fund is the only thing in the world which is worth anything, and we want to have cash sitting here right now. Well, I can tell you they don't run their personal lives like that, and no one should run their personal life like that. It's planning for how you will fund it. That's the important thing. And knowing that that capital works fund costs money. It's not free. It's come from somewhere and it had a cost. Same with the special levy, same with the debt. They all cost money. And to stop, well, not to stop, to add to your thinking, it's not just the pre-tax cost. What's the after-tax implications of this for me? Now, right at the beginning, Nikki said some very important things. This is not legal advice. No, it's not. Talk to lawyers for that, and it's legal advice has got to be specific to your situation. It's not financial advice either, although we happen to know an awful lot about this stuff. However, we can give you some facts that you can take to your financial advisor, who's possibly your accountant, and start to have the conversation. Don't expect your accountant to be an expert on this stuff, particularly when it comes to tax and strata stuff, but the conversations need to be started.
Okay, another question. A quarter of owners in our 12-lot strata scheme in Sydney continuously default on their relatively low quarterly levies. Our strata manager emailed the owners recently stating he had negotiated a $500,000 unsecured loan with a finance company with interest charged at 10% per annum for 5 years in order to pay for a major capital works project. As a quarter of our lot owners cannot pay their current levies, how are they expected to cover a large increase? Do finance companies assess the financial circumstances of the plan and the ability to repay the loan? Would they be aware of the current arrears? What does the legislation say?
We're going to start off by saying something which is really confronting and people are not going to like. And the issue is some people cannot afford the property that they have. Strata is not a form of social housing. It's not a way of dealing with the housing situation in Australia. When you buy into a strata corporation, you don't buy in expecting to provide financial support to your fellow owners. We expect the federal government, we're an Australian citizen and we expect our taxes to go to help disadvantaged people, the same thing at a state level, even the same thing at a council level. But at an owner corporation level, no one buys a property saying, my obligation is to give financial assistance to my fellow owners in this property. Paul,
it's a hot topic at the moment.
It's very, very
hot topic because with inflation, with increasing cost of living pressures on everybody, there has been a spotlight on owners not paying their levies. Some of the stories that have been highlighted aren't owners being impacted by the current situation. Their owners have always neglected their levies. So it is very important, but it's not up to it shouldn't be up to all of the owners to buoy those people who can't do it. So it's a very important topic.
It is. There are some people who bought a property they should never have bought in the first place. There are other people who, because of the change in the economic environment, can no longer afford that property. Now, interest rates going up over the last several years, an obvious thing. Or there are some people, because of a change in their own personal circumstances, can no longer afford that property. It is a sad reality. It's confronting and difficult, but it's the elephant in the room. Some people living in strata should not be there. But in a strata situation between the corporation and the owner, there is no such concept of financial hardship, and there should not be, there cannot be. Now, this is really confronting for some people. It's a very hard fact of life. I'm being very blunt about it, and maybe I should be more understanding of the situation, or because for an individual person, this is horrible and it's a tragedy. It's really, really hard. But it's not up to some people in a block to make good the other people who can't pay. And the legislation provides for all the powers of the corporation, and they can employ a strata manager to do this or a debt collector, all the powers for the corporation to collect those levies. And if it means that that person has to sell their unit, sometimes it's horrible, but that is actually the financial fact of it.
As a lender, are we looking at individual owners' financial positions?
Well, it's related to the first bit,
because
we're lending to the corporation, and it's the corporation needs funds. So the corporation exists as a separate legal entity, and it has obligations. Under law, it must repair and maintain. There's no escaping that. So under law, it must receive the funds to do it. And it's true. We're an owner. We're sitting here thinking, why does the corporation exist? Well, it's to help me. It's to provide a lift so I can get up to my apartment. It's to take away the rubbish and things like that. If you think about it from this other thing, from the legal entity called the corporation, an owner exists in order to provide funds to the corporation so it can meet its obligations. Now, I don't know in this particular situation what the right things for the defaulting owners should be or the non-defaulting owners, but quite clearly, temporarily, the corporation has a liquidity crisis, a cash flow crisis. Ultimately, it will get its funds when those people either pay their levies or sell their properties in order that the levies be paid. So it's got a short-term funding problem.
So just to summarize that, owners need to pay their levies. And there should be an arrears policy, or there will be an arrears policy within your owner's corporation to ensure that they do. And the strata manager needs to enact that if you do have owners consistently in arrears. Yes, we do look at arrears and what the individual owners are up to. In some instances, we'll step in and say, what are you doing here? But essentially, the loan is to the owner's corporation. And as Paul said, the owner's corporation does exist as an entity unto itself. If there's a majority vote, in Queensland, it can vary according to the modules. If there's a majority vote to seek funding through a strata lender, then all of the owners' corporations, all of the owners are responsible for that, and they must pay their levies to account for.
Just to add another sort of thought to that, most of what an owner corporation does is not discretionary. There's no choice but to repair and maintain. There's no choice but to pay the plumber or to pay the cleaner or whatever. It has to be done. Therefore, the choice is which way do you want to fund it? And the choice here, do you want to fund it by pursuing against the people not paid? Very valid thing to do. Do you want to fund it by having bigger levies and so the contributing owners pay more? That can also be valid. Or do you want to fund it by borrowing? But it's not an issue of can the owners afford the loan? It's an issue of the corporation must make these payments. You choose how to fund it.
So we might leave it at that point. We thank you very much for spending the time with us.
No, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Nikki.
If you gained value from this video, please hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're looking for information about parking, strata insurance, defects and more, head over to lookupstrata.com.au or sign up to our free weekly newsletter via the link in the description box below.